Boker is Daf Yomi is Nazir Daf Beis. We're going to start Maseches Nazir, and the Masechta begins in this way that's almost the same way as the way Maseches Nadarim begins. In the tractate begins called Kinuye Naziros, that we know from the beginning of Maseches Nadarim that there are a few different ways you can make a neder, and the same thing is going to be applying to a nazir, because a nazir is a type of vow. So the neder can be made by just making a straight out neder, a straight out vow, or you can use what's called a kinoi. A kinoi is a term that's associated with the actual term. Like, you might call it a nickname, but it's another name for the term of Nazir that you're taking upon yourself. So the Mishnah says, "Kol kinuye naziros are like naziros." Any kinoi, any similar term to a Nazirite, to a Nazir, is also going to be you're taking upon yourself a Nazirite. Tosfos explains what this means or we'll look at the Rush. The commentary, the go-to commentary here is the Rush, because the quote unquote Rashi on the side of the page is not the Rashi. So the Rush writes, Kol she'eno ikar Hashem, anything that's not the main name is called a kinoi, like hamekana shem l'chaver, like somebody who gives his friend a nickname. So the Mishnah is saying any associated term when you take upon yourself the vow of Naziros is you've taken upon yourself the vow of being a Nazir. And then the Mishnah goes and gives an example of a yad. That's another way you can take upon yourself a neder. What is a yad? A yad is like a handle that you're holding onto something. So this is a type of phrase where you don't finish the phrase. It's not a kinoi, but it's just a shortened version of the phrase. So for the Mishnah gives examples of yados, which is also going to be the accepting upon yourself of a vow of Nazirus. So if a person says, Omar aha hareza Nazir, what's aha? So the Rush explains, Lava for Rushe Kinuye Kaasi. It's not coming to explain the concept of kinoi, Elayad Neder Have, but it's like a handle to the vow. Like I just explained. Come on, Oches Akli Bebeis Yachel, like somebody who holds a utensil by the handle. That he's holding the utensil and he's holding the handle and the utensil with it. So too here also, Rav Neder Mamishabi, he didn't actually make the vow. So it has the implication of a neder. The Rabbeinu Kra Mahave Neder Mamish, and the verse says it's like an actual neder. So you don't have to formulate the entire words of the vow. If you just said a yad, a handle to the vow, it's as though you said the vow of Nazirus. So if a person says, aha, I will be, that's a Nazir. That's a Nazir. The Gemara is going to explain it means that you say that while a Nazir is walking in front of you. Or if a person says, oh, I'll be beautiful, then he's a Nazir. Naziach, or Paziach. So now the Mishnah reverses to telling us about the kinuyim. And the Gemara is going to explain that why the Mishnah works in this manner. But if a person says nazik, naziach, and paziach, these are synonyms or alternative terms for a Nazirite. Where are these alternative terms coming from? So the Mefarish here on the side of the page explains, because what happened was that if you were writing the letter Kuf and you missed you erased the foot, the regel of the Kuf, then what's going to look like a resh. Or if you are writing a ches and you take out the left wall of the ches, then what's going to happen is you're going to have also a resh, and it spells Nazir. Or the gag of the pay, and that's going to make it into a nun. So therefore, for these reasons, we're going to say that there are synonyms for Nazarite, because a scribe could easily write it in this manner. If a person says Hareini Kazeh, if a person says I am like this, or if the person says Hareini Misal, so the Gemara is going to define these terms, Hareini Mechalkel, These are all terms associated with hair that you're letting your hair grow. In all these cases, Harei and Nazir. These are synonyms. These are kinuyim for Nazirite. Let's say a person says Harei alai tziporim. The person says, I am like the birds. And here we have to refer to the fact that there were two birds that if a person became tamei, that while they're in their state of Nazirus, they're the karbanos of the Nazirite. This is the concept that a person who becomes tamei while they're a Nazirite, they have to bring shtei torim or shnei b'nei yonah as part of their purification process. So therefore, these two birds. Hold on one second. Are clearly associated with a state of a Nazirite. So therefore, Rabbi Meir says, if a person says, I have upon me birds, and the Gemara is going to explain, and a Nazirite is walking in front of him. Rabbi Meir says he's a Nazirite, whereas the Chachamim say Eino Nazir, because the Chachamim say he's not a Nazirite, because a Nazir who's tahor does not bring these two birds, and so therefore he's not going to be a reference to a Nazirite. When you do the vow, you're vowing assuming the best or the worst, and the Chachamim say he's not going to be a Nazirite because a pure Nazirite doesn't bring the two birds. So the Gemara asked the question, Mechti Tana. And the first question of the Gemara is, why are we talking about Nazir in Seder Nashim? We're talking about the tractate of the volume dealing with women. What does Nazirite have to do with a woman? Sure, a woman could be a Nazirite, but it doesn't necessarily follow that Nazirite should be in the laws of the Nazir should be in the volume of women. So Milchli Tana B'Seder Nashim Klai, since the Tana is referring to women, is in the Seder of Nashim. My time Atani Nazir. So what's the reason that the Tana is putting Nazir, is organizing Nazir in volume of women? So the Gemara says, Tana Akrakai, the Tana is basing himself upon the verse. Because what does the verse say? Now, this is the verse that refers to having to send away, divorce one's wife if he finds an erva, something that she was adulterous, that he's required to divorce her. And so the pasuk says, so the pasuk means as the Gemara, mi garam walav yayin. That what caused mi garam walav, what caused her to commit the sin that causes her husband to have to divorce her? Yayin, that she drank the wine, as it states, v'kamar kol haroa sota b'kilkula yazir atzma min hayayin. And that's why the verse, the Torah puts together the passage of sota, the passage of Nazirite, to say that whoever sees the sota in her state of disarray, he is going to separate himself from the wine. He's going to take an extreme response. So we're seeing here, what is the definition of a Nazir? A Nazir is somebody who takes an extreme response to seeing, a bad situation. And that's why we're putting this in the volume of women, because this Nazirite has witnessed the world, and he says, I want to be different, I want to be better. That's the concept of a Nazir. So the Gemara says, Pasach b'kinuyin u'mefarish yados. So the Gemara says, let's go to discuss the actual language of the Mishnah. The Mishnah starts by talking about the kinuyim of the Nazir, the alternative terms for Nazirite, and then the Mishnah starts explaining the yados. It starts saying, aha is a Nazir, aha is a handle. It's not a kinoi. It's a yad, not a kinoi. So why does it go from? It starts by saying kol kinoi and naziris kinaziris, and then it goes to yados. So amarava v'teima kedi. Some say kedi is a name. Some say a kedi is a term. But this position is chisuri mechsera. That the Mishnah was missing some words. We have to fill them in. Vachi katane kol kinoi naziros kinaziros. V'yados naziros kinaziros. All the kinuyim of a nazir are like a nazir, and now fit in the words that all the yados of a nazir are also like a nazir. Ve'elu yados, and these are examples of yados. Omer aha, harei a nazir. If a person says aha, they are a nazir. So that's the way we read our Mishnah. We add in the phrase that all the yados of naziros are also naziros, and that's why we go into explaining a yad. Gemara says, yeah, but if we explain the kinuyim first, v'lifresh kinuye bereisha. So why don't we go into explaining the kinuyim first? The kinuyim are the first ones mentioned in the Mishnah. So the kinuyim should be the ones explained first. So the Gemara explains, Tana mehuda salek ahu mefarish bereisha. No, the way the Mishnah, the way the Gemara, the way the Tana works, or the Mishnah is, he says two things, and the last one he says is the one he explains first. The Gemara is going to give now several examples of this. So the first example is like we learned with Masechah Shabbos. It says, "What are you allowed to light the candles with on Shabbos?" But with what can you light the candles on Shabbos? And then it states mefarish, and then it states ein madlikin. And then it states you're not allowed to light the candles with these things first. And so therefore, we see from here that that's another example of where the Tana goes from what it explained last, and it goes what it mentioned last and explains that first. And the second example comes from the prohibition of hatmana, that you're not allowed to insulate a food in a certain manner on Erev Shabbos in a way that increases the heat on Shabbos. And the Mishnah explains, what can you insulate with prior to Shabbos and what can you not? And then the first thing it explains is what you cannot insulate. Third example, with what is a woman allowed to wear into the public domain on Shabbos? She's not allowed to wear those things that we're concerned she's going to take off on Shabbos, and she might come to carry them. So it says, what can a woman wear and what can she not wear? The Farish then explains first, explains first those things she's not allowed to wear. Gemara says, Tanan, is this really the case? The Gemara says, is it really the case that if it mentions two prohibitions in the Mishnah, two concepts in the Mishnah, that it's going to explain the second one first? But let me give you some examples where we see the opposite. It says, with what can an animal go out within Shabbos and what can an animal not go out within Shabbos? Because an animal is also, you're not allowed to work your animals on Shabbos. So if the animal is carrying certain things, it's a burden and not part of what the animal needs to wear. So you're not allowed to burden the animal on Shabbos. So with what can the animal go out with on Shabbos? What can it not go out with? And then explains Yotze Gamal. Then explains first that what the camel is allowed to go out with. So we see from here, it goes back to the first concept, not the second comment. What does an animal not go out with? And then it states in the second reason, Yesh Nochlin Umanchilin, there are some who inherit and bequeath. Nochlin V'lomachilin. Category 2, some who inherit but do not bequeath. Category 3, Manchilin V'lonochlin, there are some who bequeath but don't inherit. And then the category 4 is Lo Nochlin V'lomachilin, there are some who don't do either one. And so this whole Gemara is going to explain in Baba Basra. But for now, when it comes to explain the Mishnah says, and then it goes right back to the beginning and says these are the ones who inherit and bequeath at the first. So it's not a hard and fast rule that whatever was explained second is whatever is mentioned second is explained first, like it does in our Mishnah. So why does our Mishnah explain the Yados before it explains the Kinuyim? So the Gemara says, the Tana sometimes does it one way and sometimes does it the other way. So therefore, but therefore, with respect to the lighting of the candles on Shabbos, where we explained, but where we say a madlik and bereisha, where we say what you're not allowed to do first. What's the reason there? The first there we're concerned that it's a prohibition upon yourself. You're going to come to violate the Shabbos. So therefore, the Mishnah is going to explain the Isuri Dinavsha, the prohibition, before it explains the permission, because it's a prohibition that you yourself are doing. But Gabe Behema, the Isure, where the prohibition is coming, the prohibition is not coming from the person directly, it's coming from the animal, because you have a mitzvah of shvisas behema, of letting your animal rest on Shabbos. Therefore, mefarish heter bereisha. Therefore, it explains the permission first. And what's the reasoning here? What's the reason why it explains the permission first? So the Rash explains mishum disuri dinav shechamer ilave. Because the prohibition upon himself is stricter than the prohibition that's on an animal, and so therefore he explains the prohibition upon himself first. The Mefarish gives a different explanation. The Mefarish says, by an animal, the Mefarish gives a different answer. The Mefarish says that behema, the penalty is not as severe, that when the animal goes out, if he sends out the animal with a burden, he's not going to be liable for stoning or a chatas, but it's a lesser prohibition, and so therefore it's not as severe, and so therefore it doesn't have to say the prohibitions first. So that's a distinction that the Mefarish makes. So now the Gemara says, and also gabe, but gabe yesh nochlin, but when it comes to inheritance, nami mefarish ikar nachla bereisha. Therefore, it explains the main concept of inheriting first, and then it starts to give the exceptions. Okay, but over here, so the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, it should explain the kinuyim first. Over here in our Mishnah, if I were on the top of Beis and Beis, in our case here, the Farish Kinuyim Bereisha, it should explain the Kinuyim, the synonymous terms first. So what's the reason why it explains the Yados before the Kinuyim? Since the whole concept of a Yad was learned out from a Drasha and not from Svara, so this was discussed in the Gemara in the Darim on Daf Yud. So basically, the pasuk when the rabbis learned out the whole concept that a yad is a binding neder from the fact that it states in the verse Isha Isha ki afilu endor neder nazir la Hashem. And so since the verse changes the normal way it was writing, and it says Asor Isor, and here it says it uses that language, and that teaches us this concept that we have to make a drasha, and then and the drasha is that we're going to say that a yad is a legitimate way of making a vow, and so therefore, but as opposed to a kinoi, the Gemara in Nedarim tells us that Rabbi Yochanan says that a kinoi is just the way of the umos, that it's just using it like the modern vernacular way of speaking. And Rish Lakish says that these were new languages that the Chachamim, the new words that the Chachamim said are also words. But this is based upon a svara. It's not based upon a drasha. It's based upon logic, not a drasha. So therefore, chaviv and lay, the yados are more precious to Rabbi when he's writing his Mishnah, and so therefore we explain the yados first. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, liftach paham bereisha. So if that's the case, why don't we just start with yados in the Mishnah? Atana ki matchil beikar. And then, so when when Rebbe started the Mishnah, he started with the main language of Naziros, and therefore, as a result of that, Karban. And so therefore he says the main language and the ones that you're most liable for karban, and the simplest ones, and then it goes and explains the yados first. So now we had said, what's a yad of a Nazir? If you say aha, if you say I will be, then you're a Nazirite. So the Gemara says, Dilma aha b'tainis kamar. Maybe aha means to say I will be a fasting. How do you know it means I'm going to be a Nazirite? Amar Shmuel could go into a Nazir over a fanav. No, there's a Nazirite walking in front of him. That's why he says it. He has a Nazirite walking in front of him. So of course he's going to say, I'm going to be a Nazirite. That's why we understand it to mean that. So that's what Shmuel says. Lema kosav Shmuel must be Shmuel's in the position. Yadayim sheim machlichos lavin yadayim. So it must be for the fact that Shmuel says you're only a Nazirite because you have the Nazirite walking in front of him. Therefore, if there wouldn't be a Nazirite walking in front of him, he wouldn't be a Nazir. Even though when he says aha, it means that he's trying to accept upon himself to be a Nazirite, but it wouldn't be dispositive unless there was a Nazirite walking in front of him. So it must be Shmuel's in the position that if the yad is not really a strong proof, we're not going to say it's a yad, and if that was not binding. So the Gemara says, no, Amri, really Shmuel says, even if the yad is not mochiach, it's real. Even if the yad is not a clear proof, it's still going to be like a yad. but rather we say Bisman Shen Nazir over Lefanav, Leiko Safuka B'milsach Rina. That when the Nazir walks in front of him, then we don't have to be concerned that maybe he had a different idea in mind, meaning to say I'll be fasting. And so therefore, if there's somebody walking in front of him, we assume he's for sure a Nazirite. But if there's no Nazirite walking in front of him, then it's not even going to be a yad she'enim mochicha. It's not a yad at all. I'm reading Dilma Habatainus Kamar. There's no evidence of what he's talking about at all. And so therefore, we're going to say it's not proof at all. Meaning, if there's a little bit of proof, Shmuel would follow it. But if there's no Nazirite walking in front of him, there's nothing whatsoever to indicate that he's a Nazirite, so it's not going to be enough. So the Gemara says, but maybe what he's saying was Vidilmo Apotrom in Karbonosov. Maybe he wants to just say that maybe even though there's a Nazirite walking in front of him, maybe he's not trying to be accepted Nazirite upon himself. Maybe he's just trying to say that this Nazirite is walking in front of him, won't have to bring the sacrifices. And therefore he says, Ka'amar, meaning to say, I'm going to bring his sacrifice instead of this Nazir. I'll bring his sacrifices for him. So the Gemara says, no, that what happened was, he says, I will be. The Nazirite's walking in front of him. And Bilibo, Ka'amar Bilibo, he said in his mind at that time, he says, you know what? I'm going to, in his mind, he accepted upon himself to be a Nazirite. Well, the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, we're talking about where he accepted upon himself to be a Nazirite, what's the finish here? Obviously, he accepted upon himself to be a Nazirite. There's a Nazirite walking in front of him, and he said, aha. So, of course, in all those cases, he's going to be a Nazirite. So the Gemara says, no, Malatim, he might have said, but you might have said, we need his mind and his mouth to be both acting the same way. We need him to enunciate, I will be a Nazirite, not just to keep it in his mind. No, we don't need it. That if the Nazirite's walking in front of him, then we're going to say it's sufficient that he says aha, and then he'll be a Nazirite. So now it says the Mishnah had said aha na'eh, if he says I'll be beautiful, he's going to be a Nazirite. So the Gemara says with Dilma, maybe all it means is maybe it means I'll be beautiful before God with mitzvahs. Maybe it has nothing to do with the Nazirite. Maybe he says I'll just beautify God with the performance of mitzvahs. As Salafan of Sukkah, maybe it just means I'll make before God a beautiful sukkah, or a lulav na, or a beautiful lulav, or tzitzis na, or a beautiful tzitzis, or echtav of sefer Torah na. Or maybe it means I'm just going to write a beautiful Torah scroll. And I'm going to wrap the Torah scroll in this silk cover. So maybe that's all he's saying. By the way, so we see from here that it's a tremendous mitzvah to not only just write a Sefer Torah, but to also have a beautiful cover for it. So maybe that's all he's saying. It's also a tremendous mitzvah to have a beautiful sukkah, beautiful lulav, beautiful tzitzis. Maybe that's all he's saying. Why do we say that if he says that he's intending to be a Nazir? So Shmuel explains, Shetafas Besaro. He's grabbing a hold of his hair. And he says, he says, he's holding his hair. And he says, I'll be beautiful. And it shows that his impression is to become beautiful with the mitzvahs that depend upon the hair, and that is to be a Nazir. So the Gemara says, it doesn't make sense to say that really he's intending to be a Nazirite. Hold on, we'll stop the recording here.